Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. My day is made greater. The ending a just finished a work day, and now I get to end my day by talking to someone from a band that I really just I'm learning to really like. The more I go
Oh,
backwards with the catalog, with the
great.
two EPs and two albums, right?
Yep.
I've been kind of going through them in the process. We'll talk about that in a second, but first, let me just introduce everybody who's going to be watching this video in the future. This is Mike Clark, guitarist and the founding member of the band Final Gravity, and they have a new six-song EP that came out about 2 months ago around Thanksgiving, right? Somewhere around Thanksgiving.
Right before, yeah, about a week before Thanksgiving.
All right, and now they're out and about promoting it and letting people hear their great songs. So, Mike, thanks for being here with us today. Really appreciate that.
Oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate it as well.
So remind me, when did you guys formed in somewhere around 2010, somewhere around there?
Final Gravity actually formed in 2006, and
Oh,
I've
okay.
actually known Charles, the bass player, and John, the drummer, for forever. And we played in groups earlier. What kind of happened was we kind of gotten, our day jobs and, ways of making our livings and all that. And we stayed in touch, but we actually had, John had kids and they had like their 1 year old birthday party. And we were hanging out in his backyard and we're like, hey, man, we should get the old band back together. So we kind of started getting together and slowly kind of, playing again and writing material. And over time, this is with Bill Moore, our original singer, and
Right,
his old
right.
friend. So we basically were doing that for a while, and I think after about a year, we got serious enough. We're like, well, why don't we get out and play? And then started to write more and more songs, and took a while, but that kind of culminated with our 2009 album, the self-titled Final Gravity album.
Okay. So if I remember correctly, it's full length EP, right? Is that the kind of the
Yeah.
trajectory of this? Okay, great.
Yep.
So you started with that first record then with self-titled record, full album, and then you know the timeline better than me because you lived it, but I think it was like about 2014, maybe, that you had a chance to do a show with Fates Warning, and you kind of were at a crossroads because your lead singer at the time was about to go into teaching and become a
Yeah.
teacher, and you had to figure out and what you were going to do about that to still be able to do that gig.
Yeah, it was actually 2010. So what
I'm see,
was,
I'm
well,
off by 4 years on everything. This is not only are we in different time zones, but I'm 4 years behind everything that you're doing. I'm sorry.
different year zones.
Yeah.
No, so what happened was, we recorded, it took a while, but we recorded that debut album. And Bill, our singer, he was like a postdoctoral researcher at UCLA for a long time. And,
Okay.
the timing was unfortunate, but a few months after we put the album out, he ended up landing a professorship out in Virginia.
Oh wow.
And, kind of we understood, he had to take it just for, advancing his career, but really bad timing in terms of we had this album out. We were planning to do more kind of publicity and promotion on it. And suddenly we had no singer. And
Right.
then, 2010 starts, and we just kind of almost out of the blue get this offer to open up for Fates Warning, who the three of us who are still with the band at that point were just really into. We'd seen them
Sure.
live a lot, really into like their albums like Parallels and Perfect Shade of Grey and all that. Or sorry, Pleasant Shade of Grey. And so we're just like, yeah, we got to open for him, but we have no singer. And so we kind of like, looked at a couple of different options, but we knew Melissa, our current singer, from playing on a bill with her old Led Zeppelin tribute band. Like she's currently in an all-female Led Zeppelin tribute band. She was in a different one when we met her. So we played on the bill with them. We're really impressed, and we kind of went to introduce ourselves, got to know them. So suddenly we're in this little conundrum with Fates Warning, and John is like, maybe we should call Melissa, and we're like, sure. And well, it turned out Melissa was actually in Australia back home, kind of waiting to come back to the US. And so we kind of reached out and said, hey, this might sound weird, but we got this opportunity to do a gig. And it's like, I think we have like about 2 weeks notice to do it. And we basically said, would you be up for flying back to the US and playing this gig? And she's like, sure, that'd be great. So we ended up kind of like rehearsing, the three of us in LA. We gave her some tapes to rehearse with. She flew out. We did kind of a whirlwind, like 3 days of rehearsal, and then right after that, we're playing in front of 1,000 people, opening for Fates Warning.
Wow. That's just so awesome. So awesome.
Yeah,
and the fit, her vocals are such a great fit with what you guys are doing right now. It's just I love her vocals, and I love all how the quartet fits together. It just sounds so conjoined. Like it sounds so, it sounds great. I don't know what I'm looking for bigger words, but it just sounds awesome. It really does. And it sounds like
Yeah.
she had always been a part of it. No disrespect to, previous Bill that had gone on, no disrespect to him. I like his tracks too. I like his vocals with what you do, but this just took it in a different direction, and you never know what direction it's going to take it in. And
Yeah.
boy, it's just like the next chapter.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly opened up like, higher parts of vocal range. And, I think even from that Fates Warning show, it just kind of felt right. It like felt
Yeah.
like, it brought a new energy to it. I think, yeah, just a good chemistry. Even though this is a person we didn't know that well at that point, but it just kind of clicked right on. And, again, this little trial by fire, playing that show after 3 days of rehearsal, we felt really good about it.
So, okay, so you finished the show and it went well and everything, and you say, Melissa, I know you're just here for this one gig. You're back and forth between Australia and the US. Uh, the conversation continues. Do you want to be a permanent lead singer? How did that all come about then? Was there any tentative for a moment of just thinking this all through?
Um, no, we pretty quickly offered, to ask her to be like a full-time member of the band. Fortunately, she actually was living in the US. She was
Okay,
back home and, on a vacation, and kind of flew back early to do the show.
gotcha.
So in terms of the logistics where she was living, that wasn't a problem. But
Good,
no,
good.
she
Yeah.
was open to it, and we started playing, playing other gigs out with her pretty quickly after that show in early 2010.
I like the current sound of the lineup. I went back and listened to some of the earlier records too, of course, but I just really like where it's at right now so
Oh,
much.
cool.
It just sounds like a great combo, great combo.
Yeah, thank you.
So I read about how you came up with the name of Final Gravity, but I thought it'd be more fun for you to kind of tell the audience as to what how that came about and what it means, what it stands for, and
Yeah, well, so I kind of mentioned that Final Gravity got together basically at this kid's birthday party in our drummer's backyard. And one thing that I've been particularly into during that kind of period leading up to that was I got really into craft beer to the point where I was like home brewing. I actually became a certified beer judge for a long time.
wow,
Going to beer tastings all the time, and I especially got Charles into it. So he and I were going to beer tastings like, once or twice a month for an extended period. And, John was also a big, craft beer guy as well. And Bill, our original singer. So basically, when we were trying to think of band names, we're like, well, we should do something with beer. And because
yeah,
I, was geeking out with all the beer judge certification, we'd initially picked the name Amendment 21, which is the repeal of prohibition, because we thought that was
okay,
kind of cool for, bringing back the fun,
yeah,
only to find out that there was another fairly high profile Amendment 21 out there 6 months into our tenure.
right,
So then we kind of thought final gravity, which it's a term that's basically, it refers to the density of fermented alcohol or beer after the fermentation is complete, and the density is relative to water. So for example, if you have a final gravity of 1.005, it's 5% heavier than water. So there's also a term original gravity, which is the density before you ferment. And the difference between the original gravity and the final gravity is a rough measure of how much alcohol you have in the finished product.
So, I wonder as people, people that didn't know how you were named and they see the new EP, for example, Stormchaser, you think so your band has a lot of progressive rock tendencies, although not
Mm-hmm.
only, you're very diverse, but you hear
Right.
that a lot of the progressive rock tendencies in some of the music, thinking this is
Yep.
some kind of and you see the album cover and Final Gravity, this is, some kind of thing with space. And then you find out about, I loved reading about it. I thought that's really cool. I wouldn't have known that. I enjoy my occasional beverage, but I'm not although I've had friends who have tried to pull me into that world of trying to, the dark bottles and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I just, my time windows aren't that good to be able to sit down. I'm 4 years behind and everything. What can I say? I'm 4 years behind in all of it. No, but I mean, it's really hard to get deep into anything but my music, it seems like at this point, my music and this kind of stuff, my full-time music work.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing along those lines is Bill, our original singer, he was a planetary geologist, so being a scientist and kind of dealing with astronomy and planetary science, um, he and then Charles and I are both like massive science geeks, especially in like space and physics and all that.
Yeah.
So it pretty quickly occurred to us, well, a secondary meaning of this could be
Yeah.
like referring to a black hole, and going through a black hole is probably the final gravity you're ever going to feel. So we certainly had that in mind. That was part of the appeal of the name when we came up with it.
That's really neat. Yeah, get the good double meaning. That's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah, and I think the new album artwork kind of, is more along the lines of that as opposed to the
Right.
beer theme.
And I saw on the Facebook page a lot of people are putting posts about space related things on your Facebook page and the band's Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
Some space things.
Yep.
And I didn't notice if they were people related to the band, like the former band members and all. Like Bill or whoever. But just noticed that people were posting a lot of space related, posts on there.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, so with the EP, how did it come about to be working with the producer Rich Mouser? How did that? How did he's done for people who aren't familiar with him? He's done stuff with Weezer, with Rivers by himself, with Transatlantic, Neil Morse, Tears for Fears, and there's a long list. The Rentals, all
Yeah.
sorts of bands from all different genres of music. How did that come about for you to pull him and recruit him for this album?
Well, I think, as a potential producer, he got on our radar because there's a band here in LA called Low Bait Scarp, and Rich produced their second album, and I think he did some work on their first album as well. And this is a few years ago, but we were really impressed with basically the sound and the, general recording and performances that Rich got on that album. When we kind of became aware of that, I looked at his credits and I'm like, holy crap, like the actually Transatlantic. I had this period probably after I got my first, day job where I wasn't really doing a whole lot of music and I wasn't really playing guitar a whole lot. And I was working in a music related company, and one of my colleagues got a promo and he's like, you got to check out this Transatlantic album. They have a cover of a Procol Harum song that's really cool.
Really?
So I put it on and I started with the All of the Above, which is the opening track, which is like 30 minutes long. And it's almost like a very inspired by Close to the Edge by Yes type of thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
A ton of different parts, really lush production. I'm like, that actually was one of the things that kind of got me back into like playing. I'm like, wow, this reminded me of like what's so cool about, you know, all the music that I was into. And I started picking up my guitar more and realized, retrospectively when we, heard about Low Bait Scarp, I'm like, oh, wow, Rich Mouser did the Transatlantic album. So when his name came up as a potential producer, I'm like, absolutely. Because I mean, there was Liquid Tension Experiment, a bunch of other, projects and bands that we're like super into. So for me, it was like a no-brainer. I mean, I just love, his discography and the work that he's done and the sound of what he's, gotten out of his like engineering and mixing and recording of bands.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at the list of people that he has worked with over time, I could see how it would be a really good fit, because of some of the variety. But like you said, some of the bands you're familiar with out there on the West Coast, and then
Yeah.
just like the things like Transatlantic, and I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, first of all, it's a big year for Dream Theater. I know that's one of the prog rock bands that you guys talk about being, enamored with, and Mike Portnoy coming back into the fold with that
Yep.
band. And I think, if I remember correctly, he's part of 5 bands. I work at a concert venue. He comes through about 5 times a year with those different bands. And I think Transatlantic's one of them, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So Transatlantic and Flying Colors and District 97 and I mean Steve, right? I think a little bit of work with Neil Morse band, I think, and maybe not.
Yeah, tons with Neil. I mean, he's aligned with Neil Morse in a lot of different projects, and he's even done like tribute bands. Like, did a Beatles tribute that I think Neil Morse was in.
Really?
He actually did a Rush tribute. I think it was like Paul Gilbert was in it on guitar.
From Mr. Big, yeah.
Yeah, and then and then Portnoy had Sons of Apollo, which is sort of his.
Yeah, that's another one. They
band.
came through too. Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Winery Dogs are another one. They're kind of a little bit more like pop metal, but
you helped finish the list. I couldn't think of all of them, but they've all, believe it or not, I mean, they've all come through our venue in the Midwest here within about 3 or 4 years. So he's
cool.
like, we should basically have a hotel room for the guy because I mean, he's there with each of these bands each time. And it's really amazing how how much work he does, and studio work and sometimes the touring work, and so yeah.
Yeah, and have you heard the two Dream Theater tracks they put out?
I have not yet.
So they're both out on like YouTube, and I think they're probably on like all the streaming services. But I mean, yeah, it's weird. It's like I think it's just kind of like Mike Mangini is an incredible drummer. Like I've actually seen him live with Dream Theater and with some like, kind of jazz and fusion projects. He's an insane drummer, like studio and live. But there's just something about like Portnoy being with Dream Theater, it just kind of feels right. And there's like an
Yeah.
energy and a vibe to the new songs that sort of like they haven't had for a while. So it is really nice to kind of see him back.
Yeah, I was excited to hear that because I mean it's just a kind of a full circle for his career. He was away for quite a while now. Uh,
Yeah.
so so uh, the other drummer had been, sometimes they say the new guy, and the new guy means like 15, 20 years at this point. It's
Yeah.
been quite a while that Mike's not been in the fold, Mike Portnoy.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
so that's some exciting news for progressive rock people. But I know that they were on the list of, you know, so so yeah. I mean, when I saw Transatlantic was one of Rich's production credits, I thought, well, that opens this whole window of all these other bands that sound and everything. And then Rich was also in a band, Oleander, right? I mean,
Yep.
so he's been in the industry most of his life, all of
Mm-hmm.
his working years, and so it looked like it was a really. I mean, first of all, I love the sound of the album, so I know it was a good fit because it sounds great. The
Right.
album sounds great,
Oh,
and
thank you.
you're very welcome. I really enjoy it, and I the you had some pictures on the sites of working with them and everything. Everybody looks really like they gel. You can tell when a picture is staged or when this is just a little family for see a little mixing at the board and you guys looking over his shoulder, and it just really looked like it was a really good melding of people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was a good time. It was hard work, but very productive and yeah, very fulfilling. Very, very nice to work with Rich. Learned a lot.
I think that people who like to listen to music but don't make music themselves, or record in a band, don't realize all the work that goes into making an album, and how many takes on some of those tracks, probably, right, over and over, and then the overdubs and all different things and matching things up, and it's a lot of it's gonna be some late nights in the studio, I'm sure.
Yeah. I don't know if you watched that Beatles Get Back documentary.
I'm halfway
So
through. I'm
that
halfway through.
almost,
I
I
watch.
think,
Yeah,
yeah, it was kind of a good insight into, I guess what a lot of people might consider the tedium of like songwriting and working out, music. But that's kind of how it is. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and most people don't probably want to, you know, have full insight into how that is. But I mean, it really is just a lot of it's, there's the inspiration of coming up with ideas, and there's a lot of hard work to kind of hone them into a finished product. And I think that documentary caught it, and I think we had a lot of that working with Rich. We just worked really hard to kind of deliver what you're now hearing.
right, right. And I like to read a lot about. I don't read like fiction. I'm just really reading music biographies and autobiographies, and I've read a lot of producers' books, and they talk about, I'm this, I'm all these different roles. I have to wear all these different hats. Sometimes psychologist, sometimes 3 in the morning. Okay, I got this track in my head. We got to finish it right now. Okay, driving over to this, so all those kinds of
Yep.
things. And it's a fascinating thing, and just like I think people with creative minds, we're all very, as far as music creative minds, I think people who think that way very we have some perfectionist tendencies, like you record a track over and over, say, no, the guitar, just that one, even though everything's it's the best take, because it's that one note or that one thing or that one vocal, or the one drum beat or whatever it is. And so those can be some pretty long nights in the studio.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, and I think Rich really drove us hard to get the best possible performances we could out of everything, and he was really good about. I mean, we didn't have an unlimited budget, so he was also able to kind of like edit together things. We needed to like get a couple of takes to make the perfect take, but
Right.
he had a really good combination of like getting the best possible tracks we could have on tape, but being able to kind of take what we had and kind of make it great.
And it really comes out. All of the instruments come out so much. I'm an amateur songwriter, but so I listen to a lot of music, but I don't, because I'm always worried about like sounding like somebody else. When I
Mm-hmm.
listen to things, I just always so worried about that. I don't know why I worry about it so much. I just really want to have my own sound, so I go out of my way to go in different keys and different whatever.
Yeah.
But I do still listen to a lot of music because I love music, and I used to work, for record labels, and our job was to listen to music and go out and sell it. Before everything
Right.
became digital, our job was to sell CDs, and so a lot of music always passed over my desk. And I honestly have to say that with this EP, I listened so much more carefully to all the intricate parts of everything because it was interesting. It really was. I mean, the guitar starts with a melody, and then it becomes a harmony. You're layering a harmony there in the first track, in the opening
Hmm.
track. And then you've got the drums are not timekeeping at all. I mean, obviously they're timekeeping to keep the beat for the band, but it's more interesting. It's more interesting than just
Yeah.
got a beat going. You've got this whole multi-dimensional percussion happening there,
Hmm.
vocals off the hook, bass right there with it's just all in sync. And I really feel like Rich brought that out too. That it just sounds so live and so real when you listen to it. So I really love it. I mean this
Oh,
sincerely
cool.
because
Thanks.
I listened to a lot of stuff and I just kept going back to this, have it in the car and have it, and it's been a lot of fun to prepare to talk with you and everything because it's a great album.
Oh, thanks. No, and the funny thing is, we actually played a show at the Whiskey Go Go here
I
in
saw that in the
L.A.
advertisement. Yeah,
And that was sort of in prep for working with Rich. And the idea was we're going to take the songs that we planned to work on with him, and obviously get them rehearsed, and then go out and kind of road test them live. But it was really just the four of us. We didn't have any backing tracks. We didn't even have any keyboard or anything. So it's pretty much like guitar, bass, drums, vocals. And then we get with Rich, and it's like he managed to get a lot of layers in there without it sounding like completely overproduced. But
right.
it's very lush, and there's like multiple layers of guitar and a lot of vocal harmonies. But in the shows that we've done afterward, even though we don't have all that instrumentation live, I think some of the arrangement that Rich helped us with, he's kind of created these like exciting events and everything that really kind of help it go better live. So it's almost like we have this like two-sided thing. We have the recorded version, which is very full and produced, but then we have the live version, which I think they almost kind of like are symbiotic and they kind of feed off each other.
Right, because I mean, I can see that. I'd love to, hear you guys live. I know you have a couple of different videos out there, on YouTube of different live performances, and there was one that's like a 40-minute performance. I want to go back to that and check that out.
Oh,
That was
cool.
on YouTube, whatever. But yeah, because there are, like you say, many different episodes or chapters or sections, and some of the tracks in some progressive rock tracks could be 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Like you talked about the one track that you were listening to, the 30-minute track. It's another band, and
Right.
and listening to some of the longer tracks, it was so neat to just hear them keep evolving. There's one track that all of a sudden in the final minute it gets really soft, and all of a sudden the vocals come in. I just love the way things were just evolving, and like a whole new counter melody, a whole new melody came in,
Hmm.
and I was like, where did this come from? And 5 minutes of a 6 minute song, I was like, this is really cool. It kept me at the edge of my seat listening to everything because there was always something changing, and it wasn't just
Oh,
okay.
cool.
Now it's just this jam. It's just all these, like you said, events. That's a
Yeah.
perfect way you said that. Events, lots of events in the songs, and to be able to take
Hmm.
some of the ones in the studio and take them out to on the road, like you said, because even though you had a quartet and not all the studio adjustments, you kind of were thinking along the lines of what you heard. Sounds like thinking along the lines of what you heard in the studio.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was really fun to hear the events in the songs, the studio tracks.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Yeah. Glad to hear it.
so um, I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about the individual tracks themselves. With 6 songs here, we can kind of dig in and kind of talk about each one.
That
So,
sounds good.
um, starting at the top, the title. Well, let me ask this question first. The tracking of it. I know that the last album you did, I believe that. I'm sorry, the sequencing. The last album you did, I believe, was you kind of called it a concept album in a sense, sort of, but not exactly.
Hmm.
But then you start to itemize what the different songs were and how they fit together. So in this
Yeah.
one, is there a specific sequencing in a world where people go on to iTunes or wherever they're going to go, Spotify, Pandora, and listen to things in maybe a different order? I'm guessing that sequencing is still important to you as a member of this band to kind of set it up the way you hear it in your mind from top to bottom.
Yeah, I think with Surviving Humanity, our last full length album, that was kind of like, we didn't really write it as a concept album, but Melissa kind of, basically kind of formulated the concept out of all the songs and kind of, sequencing she kind of envisioned with it. And, we kind of like, heard the story and we're kind of amenable to, oh yeah, no, that sounds like an interesting way to sequence it. So that was kind of what led to that was Melissa kind of spearheaded that sequence. For Stormchaser, the new EP, it was really like, um, it was really kind of like we just wanted to have, start with the most energetic track and then kind of like try to keep the energy up at the beginning. We have a couple of like faster, heavier songs and a couple of slower, kind of more leaning toward ballad type songs. And then we do have the one Rush cover on there. So the sequencing was largely driven by kind of just trying to keep the energy up. And, we figured, well, we knew that Planet Earth, starting off acoustic and having the big vocal ending was going to be the closer. And then we ended up adding Entre Nous toward the end. I can get into that when we cover that track. But the idea was, well, we don't want to close with that because we're going to be Planet Earth. So we figured that would be second to last. So it was largely like we wanted two of the heavier songs at the beginning and then kind of the two at the end. And then we just kind of picked the order of Automatic Pilot and Story of Forever, kind of where, it's all kind of fell into place after that.
Right, right. It's just such an interesting time that people don't always listen to them in that order, which is a shame because, I mean, even an album that is not necessarily, I'm going out into the industry now, just saying albums that aren't necessarily prepared to be concept albums. We were so used to hearing them in a certain order. And so it seems almost sacrilegious to not hear, like maybe, certain songs like the Cars and Queen and some of those bands, but you'd always hear both of them on the radio or Journey, you'd hear the two songs right behind each other as played that way. They just would never play one without the other. On the modern and the hard rocks and the modern rock stations, they wouldn't, classic rock, they wouldn't just put the one song there and fade it out. They had to be together. And so along those lines, it's like bands go out of their way to sequence albums, whether concept or not concept, just like you said, the mood of the album, the energy, bring it up, bring it back down, bring it up at the end. And somebody hits a shuffle button on iTunes,
Yeah.
But by the same token, we're glad they're hearing it. We're glad they're hearing it in some way. They're hearing your music. Then that's, I guess, what really matters. Hear one track you really like, and all of a sudden they're putting in more into their playlist from your band, or from any band.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't have any pair of songs that it's like, say like with the Queen, where it's like, We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions.
Yeah. Right.
I've occasionally heard those songs separately, and it's like it just feels wrong.
Right.
Or I see you mentioned the Cars, in their background, the Cars. I just actually randomly listened to all their Rick Ocasek era albums like a couple of weeks ago.
Really.
And I think their debut album in particular is one of the greatest albums ever recorded. And I could not imagine those songs in a different order. So I know what you mean. And it's like, I guess, we got to deliver to, whatever way people will take it. But, I view an album as like a work of art, almost like, comprised of, but somewhat distinct from the constituent songs that go into it. And that sequencing is an important part of that.
Yeah. And I think there's hope for it to, because I feel like everything goes full circle. I feel like little by little, a younger generation is starting to go back to some vinyl. Yeah. And the vinyl's in order, right? The vinyl's set up in order, and sometimes they're more for collectability because it's a cool color or a swirl or whatever it is. But a lot of times, so I teach music lessons, and a lot of students will come in and they'll want to sing a song from an 80s band or from a 70s band even. And I'll be like, well, how do you know them? Oh, sometimes it's a movie soundtrack or something, Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever it is. But,
right.
Sometimes like that. But other times it's just, my folks listen to that at home. My parents got me into that band. And It's really cool. I'm starting to just a little bit after many years of not getting to work for the record label anymore because of the digital and the physical and all that. Some people I have students coming in, kids coming into a theater music store I work in and buying 45s of old bands because it's a lost art. The picture I buy all picture art I buy so that they have to, because it's lost art on that stuff. We have little, clip arts on the on the internet.
Right.
So I just feel like, it's starting to click back. So first we get to listen to vinyl, then we get to realize how important the sequencing is. And, hopefully that will, maybe we'll find people unshuffling on iTunes because they want to hear that order because they start hearing from artists and how important it was to them. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like I know with video streaming, it seems like there's a little bit of a move, maybe not back toward physical media full on, but I think the initial promise of streaming is like, everything out there is available in perpetuity, and now like in video streaming, they're kind of reneging on that somewhat. So I wonder if that's going to start to happen with audio streaming, where maybe people will be like, well, those CDs I have in a box, maybe I should pull them out again, or go to a used record shop and buy a couple of CDs or vinyl. And I think the nice thing about those formats is they sound better than streaming if you have a good system, but it's also, they're just hard enough especially with vinyl, where you're probably not going to like keep lifting the needle up, on a vinyl LP. You're
Right,
probably going to
right.
listen to at least the entire side of an album, which almost kind of forces you to hear things in sequence there.
I didn't think about that. You're right. People aren't typically going to be lifting the needle all the time. That's very true. So you
Yeah.
get, you got those radio stations that used to play album sides and everything too, like that.
Hmm.
And so, that's the least hear these album sides when they put the turntable on. And that's a
Yep.
good point. That's a really good point.
Cool.
So we're hoping one thing at a time just to get that, because I think that's a lost part of, I just love that holding on to a record or a CD and reading the liner notes, reading who was involved, reading the lyrics, all of that I feel is kind of lost,
Yeah.
you know?
I agree.
But there is an older generation that still chases all of that. So that's just where we're still chasing all that stuff. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
We'll just to share it with the younger generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dig into the tracks on the album. So
Yeah.
starting at the top with the Deep. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so the Deep is actually something we hadn't originally intended to put on the EP. So we'd originally planned for this EP to be kind of taking a bunch of our older material, a lot of like unfinished songs or things that maybe we figured we didn't kind of get completely right the first time around, and kind of put them all together and sort of have that be, get that out there with this being a precursor to us recording a brand new full album, with newer material.
Right.
So the Deep was part of the writing sessions for the new album. But what happened was we played all of the songs at the Whiskey Go Go show that we intended to record with Rich, and there was one that we presented to him that he didn't really like. It was a very Zeppelin-y, kind of groovy kind of thing, but I guess he just didn't really click with him. So we played him a few of our other demos, and he heard the Deep, and he's like, "Wow, that's pretty cool. Maybe we should work on that." We're like, "Okay." So it kind of like started off. It was longer. It was probably a little more meandering in terms of the parts. More progressive than it turned out to be. Like a lot of not a lot of odd meter, but just a lot of different parts and kind of like interesting chord progressions and all that. So when we work with Rich, what we do is we go up to his studio and we have these pre-production sessions where we basically work with him for about 8 hours, and we'd sit there in his control room and he had like a little keyboard set up for MIDI drums. I had my guitar, and we just kind of sit there and basically kind of arrange and come up with all these ideas. Melissa would grab a mic and sing vocal ideas. So Rich kind of helped us hone that into a much shorter and kind of, I guess it just kind of pops more than what we had before. And one interesting thing is, we're probably no secret from how we sound, but we're really into Rush. And the main riff or the intro riff on that song, I think it was pretty inspired by the song Best Steel Day off of the third
Okay.
Rush
Yeah.
album,
Yeah. Yeah.
Caress of Steel. But Rich kind of like said, well, why don't we do this? And he threw in this little chromatic run that made it sound a little like left field, but it really kind of helped move it away from being so derivative from Rush, but also made it really interesting. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was an interesting process that kind of brought the Deep about.
I'm sure it's really neat, like you said, to hear at the beginning when you're just putting ideas together, and then to hear it evolve into something that maybe was different than you expected to be, but really enjoyed it and liked it.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's how it started. Yeah, that's really a neat
Cool.
process. That's neat to see that process.
Thanks.
And that's the song, if I remember correctly, with the Deep, where you start with you do the dual tracking on the guitar, the melody and harmony, right?
Yeah.
But at the very beginning,
Yep.
I love that. I just love how that sounds,
Oh,
and
cool.
it just builds in, and so that's what I mean. It's interesting. Like you said, he helped to shorten some sections up or put different events in, or
Yeah.
shorten events or change them here. And I found that, if you're sitting there listening to something and you got the phone or you got your record player, your CD player, and you got that near you, and you're listening. Because unfortunately, I say the phone because sometimes there's a convenience. I gave in to Apple and iTunes a few years back, where I just have it for convenience. But I have never bought a full length on a stream. It's always been a record or a CD. But sometimes for a quick, so if you're seeing the time ticking away, it's like, it's a long track. But if you just don't look at the time and you just listen, that track really does move. You don't think, it's a 6 minute track or whatever. You just listen to it, and that's how it's got to be. And you really hear it progress, like you said, into different spaces. And maybe he shortened up some sections, like you said.
Yeah,
so,
definitely. Cool.
So then you got Far Away.
Yeah. So Far Away started off quite a while ago. It's one that I had mainly written the original version of. we played at the Whiskey A Go Go, and we called it Velvet Walled Prison. And the idea was like, the perspective is like, if because we have a female singer from the perspective of, well, you can have this life that appears on the outside to be really like prosperous and like living perfect, living in a perfect home, living a perfect life, but maybe you're just really unhappy, and maybe there's just some kind of like bad stuff going on in the relationship underlying that. So we
Right.
called it Velvet Walled Prison because the idea was like, well, it may have velvet walls, it may look like all cush and comfortable, but it's still a prison. So we presented that to Rich in one of these pre-production sessions, and he really, that's probably of all the songs the one that he really kind of helped us rearrange the most. Like the chorus on Far Away was originally a short pre-chorus on Velvet Walled Prison, but it gave it a whole different feel. But it really kind of, again, it made it kind of just come to life in a way we maybe hadn't been able to kind of do before, in the Velvet Walled Prison version of it. So we did the pre-production session. We're working on all this, and we didn't have really a bridge because we'd taken parts that were the bridge before and kind of
Right.
repurposed them for what we were working on. So there's that whole section where I'm kind of doing the hammer on wrists and the guitar, and we have all the crazy guitar soloing going on. So I had that idea just kind of around. I played it. I'm like, well, what do you think of this? And so play that that part that's in
Yeah, yeah,
there.
yeah.
And we worked with Rich, and really kind of like over the course of a couple of hours, kind of fleshed it out and built the guitar solos on it. Then we had that kind of dramatic part at the end where the line kind of like there's like kind of drum hits, and we're like moving the line up and up. And then Rich did this thing where he put this really long delay on it, where we get that weird kind of trippy sound at the end. Then we have Melissa come in with almost like a Robert Plant
Uh-huh.
female version type vocal at the end
Yeah,
to go
yeah,
back to the
yeah.
ending of it.
Right. I can hear that for
So, I
sure.
mean, all that structure came about in that pre-production session, and it sounded really good in there, but it really came to life when we recorded it because Rich, I think, got great performances out of all of us for that one.
That's exciting because, I mean, there are so many producers out there, and each producer has a different idea, a different way to do things. And, without mentioning any specific ones, there's some high profile situations out there where people completely put aside an album because it just wasn't the way they went. And these were legendary producers. I won't mention any names, and I respect them all. I really do.
Yeah,
They did some great things, but there were a couple high profile ones out there where people had a producer and they worked on it for 2 years and they shelved the record and said, no, let's start over with somebody else. And that's like, are you
yeah,
with this guy? You shelved his record, and then they came out as another record later on because this is like, well, this was this guy's mix. So it's great that it
right.
sounds like the the camaraderie, not only the camaraderie, but it just fit working with
Mm-hmm.
Rich because you keep telling me these great stories about how he took this and did that with it, and he said, let's do this, and that's the job of a producer, right? That he
Yeah,
listened to what you were saying and what you guys liked about the band, about the songs, and helped you to find something, a path. He led you to a place that you might not have gotten to as quickly, or maybe not at all. He maybe brought you down a new side road. So
yeah. I think well, given my introduction to Rich Mauser was, transatlantic in a 30-minute,
right.
we kind of went in there expecting he was going to make us more progressive and have us make longer songs. And
Oh, okay,
it kind
yeah.
of turned out to be the opposite of that, but it was really good because I think maybe that was what we needed more than like making a 9-minute song, 11 minutes, kind of honing it
Right,
down to a little more of the, kind of listener friendly format. I think it was really worked well for the CP.
right. Um, so let's move on to Automatic Pilot. Talk about that song a little bit.
Okay.
What can you
So
tell us about that?
Automatic Pilot is, yeah, that's another older track. It was actually a thing that John had worked on with our mutual friend Steve Campitelli, who was a childhood friend of mine who moved out to Pennsylvania, and then John and Steve met at Penn State and were in a band together for a couple of years out there. So they worked on this song back when they were in college, and then John moved out to LA, and he and I worked on a demo for it back, not too long after he moved out. And the demo was cool, but it was one of those things that kind of sat there for a long time. And when we were digging up this old material for the album, John said, "I'd really love to take another crack at Automatic Pilot." And when we did the original version of it, we did a demo with Bill Moore, our original singer. And when we got with Melissa, it was the original key was a little too low for her vocal range. So we moved it up about a whole step and led to me creating different guitar parts because I love like open strings. I'm very
Yeah,
influenced by Alex Lifeson from Rush. So it kind of led to some interesting kind of sounds in the guitar because the key that we moved it up to sounded very differently in terms of open string patterns, but led to some cool dissonances that we didn't have the original version of it. So I think from an arrangement standpoint, moving the key was great. That was probably the one that Rich had the least influence on arranging wise. It's pretty similar to what we did originally, but we moved the key up. Where Rich did have a big influence is he just made it sound great. Like he actually, I thought it was like the perfect amplifier to record that song. The clean parts of the song might be a Rolling Jazz Chorus 120, which Rich has. But he's like, well, why don't we try this little Marshall combo? Plug my guitar into it. And I'm like, this sounds fantastic. It's like actually it's really direct and really tight, and so he just got great sounds on that song. So I think it's really from that standpoint, is more the kind of engineering and just mixing was really what he brought to life on that song.
That's something I didn't think about until you mentioned it. This not only do you get a producer when you go into a studio like that with a good producer, but you also get to play with their toys. They got these different
Mm-hmm.
amps and different sounds, different keyboards, different things you can do. And it's
Yeah.
kind of a playground. I would imagine walking in and go, wow, we can use this. And
Yep.
um, I remember seeing a documentary that Neil Peart did, and he had his studio, and it was for
Mm-hmm.
Test for Echo, and I don't know,
Yeah.
I found it on VHS somewhere. I just couldn't even believe I was finding this. I didn't even know it existed. It was two VHS, and he had all of his drum, the snares all lined up. I'm sure you've probably seen this because it's all these drum heads lined up in the bit behind
Yeah.
him, and he just take one off, and like 30 or 40 of them. So I would imagine that's something like what maybe not to that extreme with drum heads, but like or snare drums, but a producer's studio with all the different fancy gadgets and different things to mix an album down. Besides the main mixing board, of course. I have this Marshall
Yeah.
amp.
I
I hook
have seen
this
that
in.
video, and yeah, I
Have
have
you?
seen that video, and I love it because he's breaking down all the drum parts on Test
It's
for Echo, and
amazing.
yeah, there's a lot of details that you get from him just kind of going through it on the video that you don't even hear on the album.
Yeah, it's just mind blowing. And he's got you hear him playing the track, and he's got the headphones on. He's going, okay, this is what I did here, and oh my goodness. And I'm not a
Yeah.
drummer. I'm not a drummer, but I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. Thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it. I couldn't believe it
Yeah.
because
Same
I'm
here.
a fan. I'm a fan. So
Cool.
um, So I one thing about automatic pilot that I really like, you talk about how you brought it up to a higher key for Melissa. There's a place after the long instrumental solo where there's a modulation
Mm-hmm.
upward, but it doesn't just sound like, okay, here we are. Now we're up at half step or whole step. It just kind of, I don't know, it leans into it. Like I had to really listen to it a couple of times and go, wow, it's whatever they did there is really cool. Because you say, yeah, it definitely went up, but it's not the traditional, okay, going up, going up. What
Yeah.
is anything unique about that I mean, it just
Um,
sounded like it wasn't the traditional, or just something, maybe just a guitar slide down, and then all of a sudden she's in a different key. It just sounded very unique and likable.
yeah, I mean that modulation was in the original demo. I think maybe where it sounds a little different is that it's not going up a half step or even a whole step. It's going up a minor third.
That's
So
why.
it's a
That's
bigger
why.
modulation than is typical. And
Okay,
I guess it just kind of makes it more dramatic.
that is why. Then I guess I guess that's got to be why because I just didn't sound like a lot of times people half step and whole step modulations. That's a
Yeah.
minor third. That's cool. It's
Yep.
interesting to know that because I could hear that. I was like, it just sounds so unique in a very good way. And
Yeah.
it just stood out as being, wow, this is interesting. That's why what I say about the trend of the whole album. There's some interesting events to listen to and interesting things happening. So
Yeah, and and then we do the modulation, and we're not in that key for that long. It's sort of like we get
right,
there, we do like a rep of the chorus, and then we're out. So, we I guess didn't want that modulation. We're out. It's welcome.
right. It was just enough that it was like, oh, it's just you know.
Yep.
So the story of forever.
Right. Story of Forever started off actually as kind of a garage jam. I think Bill was there for it, our original singer, but he wasn't playing anything on it. But we were just in John's garage where we used to rehearse, and we were kind of just messing around and had the recorder on. And a lot of what ended up in Story Forever was on that original recording that we did. And again, this is another one that Rich had a pretty big influence on kind of the arrangement of, because we were kind of trying to be like more, I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't say dream as technical as Dream Theater, but we were kind of thinking more kind of experimental, more modern, like you know Dream Theater ish, maybe just kind of different, more complex riffs and that kind of thing. and a little more tactical. And so we had this recording run for a long time, and we always thought, wow, that'd be really cool to finish that, but we never really figured out a way to do it. So when we were prepping for that Whiskey Go Go show, kind of in the lead up to that, we're like, we should finish that song, and we just kind of willed ourselves to come up with a workable version for performing live. And we performed it, and it went over pretty well. But then we get with Rich, and he definitely had a big influence in terms of the um, simplifying some of the technical riffs in there, creating some like really cool keyboard layers to kind of make it a little more epic in the intro and even in the choruses. I had this like tapping part that was sort of like what I was doing on the guitar, which is in the recording, but we kind of added keyboard, and the tapping part is much quieter. It's a sort of arpeggiated part that's going on in the chorus. So Rich kind of really helped in terms of restructuring the arrangement of all that to kind of make it just a little more, I guess, easier to listen to. I think maybe what we had before was a little maybe too technical for technical sake, or weird for weird's sake. And then even the bridge part where we go to the acoustic guitars, Rich actually had us slow down the tempo a lot, and we actually kind of sped the tempo up throughout that part. So it kind of built from a very slow, dramatic point up to, going back into the abrupt sextuplet part that leads into the outro of the song. And, he just got a lot of layers. Like, I had one of his Gibson acoustic guitars on there, which sounded great. Had my Taylor 6-string and 12-string guitars layered in there. Had some electric parts layered in there. So we just had a lot of layers, and he brought a lot of drama in that part. So, yeah, no, I think that there's a lot that went into that song. And I'd almost say that's got the most layers of almost anything that we did on the EP.
I think that people who listen to this that really are really big diehard music fans are really going to enjoy to hear the 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 production that went into this. And some people don't think about that. They love music, but all these different things and all these layers. It's just and how the producer interacts with the band, how the band interacts back, and there's a little bit of back and forth. Sometimes they come to a happy medium. Sometimes
Right.
maybe something's mentioned that's at first is like, this is the way we've always done it, or maybe it's like it's so. I mean, you hear a lot of things like that in conversations about producers and the bands they work with. But this is really interesting to hear all the layers that were put in and the different instruments and the sounds. And I think someone who listens to the album and then hears this interview will really be like, or vice versa, and really wants to listen to the album because of you're really giving some great detail on how these songs were put together. And it's interesting for someone that really is a diehard music fan.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Glad to hear it.
Yeah. So it's just interesting that sometimes producers too, we don't realize that they, I heard a story once about it. I didn't realize they would ever touch lyrics. I thought that lyrics were off, like just unwritten, like they could talk about sounds and instruments and levels and all that, but sometimes to suggest a different lyric. And I can't remember who I was reading that said, yeah, I suggested a different lyric and they went with it. And sometimes that would just be a deal breaker. Like, this means something to me. This line means something to me and I can't change that. Have you ever come across that even with members of a band or any along the time, like this lyric has to stay the way it is because it means this to me?
Well, with Rich, now he didn't really weigh in too much in the lyrics. There might have been a thing here and there, but it was not really very contentious with him. We've had things within the band where I mean, we all write lyrics and we all get a little proprietary about what we wrote. So sometimes it gets a little tense. And someone's like, "You change this for that." Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. So I think internally in the band we've had a little bit of conflict there, but nothing too bad.
Right. You're still recording together and having fun, so that's a good sign.
Yeah. Yep.
So then next is the Rush cover from Parallel Lines, right?
Yep. So the Rush cover, we didn't originally intend for it to be on the EP. What you hear is actually during COVID, we did a few quarantine videos where we did, I think we started off with like The Ocean by Led Zeppelin, because Melissa's in the Zeppelin tribute band. We actually did a tribute to Neil Peart where we recorded Limelight probably in early 2020, because it's not too long after he passed away. And then we did like Queensryche Revolution Calling, because we're all into Queensryche back, like Operation Mindcrime in particular.
Yeah.
But then we came back to another one. And we're like, well, I recommended we do Entre Nous because, it was relatively short, somewhat obscure, like it's not a Spirited Radio or a Tom Sawyer, but, wouldn't be too difficult for us to kind of like record and make sound good separately. So yeah, we decided like we did all our tracks separately and we videoed them and we have a YouTube video of it out there. And it was actually our most successful of the quarantine videos because I think it was probably the best performance out of the four and sounded the best. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up, like, Rich had mixed the album. Um, John kind of had the idea of like, he brought all the tracks that we recorded, cleaned them up a little bit and gave them to Rich, to give him kind of a, basically stem tracks to be able to kind of mix with and said, hey, if you have the time, we'd really appreciate it if could you run these tracks through your setup to kind of reproduce the sonic environment you had with the other tracks, run it through your effects, run it through your analog equipment, your mixing board. And so I think, he was able to get it. I think, he only had a couple hours to put into it, but made it sound like it really fit with the rest of the album. It's almost like miraculous what he did because
It sounds great with it. It's a great mix with the rest of the tracks.
yeah, we actually got the chance to go and hear the entire EP on a really high end sound system a few months ago. And when that was coming up, I'm kind of expecting, I'm like, I know Rich did a fantastic job, but I mean, the tracks were not, professionally recorded like they were with Rich, but we heard it and it's like, yeah, it fits. I mean, he really did a great job kind of bringing it into that sonic space and everything else that's on there.
I love on that track too how Melissa takes the chorus higher because she's got a higher voice obviously than Getty, but Getty's got a high voice, but
Yeah.
obviously, it's no disrespect to Getty at all, but I love that when on the chorus when she's singing Just Between Us, it's going up and he would go down
Yeah.
that way, and I think it sounds so crisp and so intense when she goes up. It just takes that vocal and just so I enjoyed that to hear that.
Yeah, we did too. And it's interesting because we got, a fair amount of compliments for that. And then the fact that Charles played a 5-string bass rather than Getty's 4-string. You do have some purists who are like, well, that note was wrong or that should have been played, that way. And it's like, well, we're not trying to exactly clone what they did.
Right.
We're not like a tribute band per se.
Right.
It is interesting how you get some of that kind of pushback if people want to hear it exactly the way it was recorded. It's like, I don't know. I think we were pretty faithful, but I mean, I think we should, have the freedom to deviate a little bit here and there.
I happened to listen to him back to back just because I was curious as to how different it was, and you guys do some different things that I really like. I mean, it's just different. It's nice, like you said. It doesn't have to be note for note. You've got bands out there, like you said, that's their thing. They're a tribute band, and some of those bands take it down to every last note, and they watch old concert videos, and if the lead singer walks off stage right, and they're going to walk off stage right, puts his hand through his hair, and gives the microphone, says good evening. It's going to be exactly to that. I mean, they down to that last thing. But this is something different. This is a band that really respects what Rush has accomplished in this long career of many, many studio and live recordings. And it's a homage. It's a tribute to your enjoyment of that band, but it doesn't have to be note for note, for sure, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
It's just a curious question since we're talking about that a little bit. Melissa, when she sings, I mean, really has this very Rush sounding voice when she sings these songs. Did she grow into that? I mean, she listens. I mean, she said she's in a Zeppelin band, a Zeppelin tribute band. Did she, as the more she was around your band, you think that or evolved over time, or is she a big Rush fan too, like you guys are?
That's a good question. I mean, she's into Rush. I mean, not to the degree that Charles, John, and I are, because I mean, I think each of us they're our favorite band.
Right.
I think what's interesting with Rush is, with their first album, a lot of people kind of compared them to like, Led Zeppelin on that album, and early Getty was a little bit more, kind of rock influence and all that.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why maybe she fit so quickly was that, we had a lot of stuff that was influenced by Rush, and having that kind of like Led Zeppelin energy, but with a female vocal range, I think really fit. I think that over time, to your point, I think, yeah, maybe she did kind of like by osmosis, maybe have some of that kind of like rub off and get a little more kind of in that Getty and later Getty vibe. So I don't know that it was necessarily intentional, but yeah, no, I now you mention it, I kind of agree that I think, kind of some of those vocals kind of, sit a little more in that range now.
They really do when you listen to it. It's not to the point where it's like someone trying to emulate. I knew she was as I listened to it. I really didn't feel like she was trying to emulate his sound, but
Yeah,
it's like when you go to a different city, you move to a different city for years. People come back with a different dial. They have a different dialect, a different
right.
sound, twang to their
Yep.
voice, or New York accent, or Chicago accent, whatever it is. And it's
Yeah.
maybe around it a lot because it's you can't help but notice it, but not in a bad way at all. In a way that it's like it sounds so neat. It sounds
Yeah.
like
Oh,
that
cool.
nothing I've heard. So and that's neat to know that all of you are big Rush fans. Obviously, when I was looking through everything, they could hear it, but then your
Yeah.
vocal, is right with that tradition of. So it's really neat to hear.
We gave our Australian singer a Rush accent.
I think so. I think so. Subliminally in the background, there's always Rush music playing in the background before any session. It was always Rush music playing, right? It's kind of happened. No, no, but it's really I love the sound. I really do. The four of
Oh,
you.
cool. Thanks.
And before I forget this, please tell Charles I really enjoy on the Facebook page the playlist that he does each week. So he might
Oh,
have a
yeah.
little heavier playlist than I might have. Although I love heavy music, don't get me wrong at all. I mean, I'm all over the place with my music, but he's got some of the heavier bands I haven't listened to as much. But now I'm really curious. So now I'm going to probably go down that list a little bit and try to listen to some of the stuff. It's just some things I write in line with, so I want to hear what this other stuff is. So I think that's kind of
Yeah.
neat.
He's very actively keeping up with like newer artists,
Yeah.
definitely in the prog and kind of metal realms. But yeah, no, I've picked up a lot of great tips from him, like musically, of bands to listen to, and obviously we go to shows live to get live shows together, and so he's been great influence in terms of exposing me to new music.
Yeah, it's just he's been very, like you said, very religiously doing that list every each week, and it's just like going
Mm-hmm.
back to some of the older ones. I'm like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Um, so the closing track, Planet Earth. Let's maybe talk about that a little bit. And you were talking about how the ending of the album, it's a couple heavier tracks, big ending of the vocal track at the end, and then the middle track. So Planet Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was sort of the song that really kicked off this whole EP idea. So John, our drummer, owns a recording studio down in Torrance, about 15 miles south of where I am right now. And this one was about 2 years ago, but he kind of floated the idea of like, hey, what if we were to get together for a day, and I've got an engineer, a guy named Chris Henry, who ended up like engineering the sessions for us. We'll just do a 1 day session and record Planet Earth. And, wanted to do it kind of more. We never actually recorded it properly. I'd had demos that were more of like an electric guitar kind of sound to it, a little more prog, at least obviously prog in the original incarnations, but wanted to kind of do like an acoustic plus version where we have like acoustic guitars and drums and bass and all that. And so we did that. We got together. We did like probably a 12, 14, I think it was about a 14-hour day. And basically recorded all the guitars, most of the vocals, bass drums. And Chris got really good performances out of us, and great performances out of Melissa. And we did come back and do a few overdubs, like a little bit of electric guitar and some keyboards and all that. But the bulk of it kind of happened from that 1 day session. And we were so happy with what we'd worked on. That was actually the first thing we engaged with Rich Mauser on, because we knew he was a great mixer. So we basically said, hey Rich, we'd love to hire you to mix this song. And we actually went up to his studio and sat there with him while he mixed it. I was just really impressed with the interactivity and kind of his workflow and the style of how he mixed it. And we walked out of there, gave us a couple of tracks to put on in the car, and I was just blown away by how great it sounded. Like, it started off really good with what we did with Chris, but Rich kind of brought it to just like a whole new level. And there's just so much like detail in what he did, like things like, oh well, I was riding this fader to get a couple more dB on this part to make it more dramatic, or yeah, in this little section I was riding the EQ to kind of make the sound a little more little softer and all that. So there's a lot of thought and a wealth of experience kind of went into the work that he did on that song. And that's really what kind of convinced us to do the entire, the remainder of the EP with him. In terms of the song itself, that was actually a song that I'd written back probably in the 90s. And, the song's basically about, things where the Earth gets to the point where just through various environmental things, it wasn't necessarily thinking climate change at that point, but more like just environmental, like, pollution, toxicity, that type of thing, that the Earth ends up kind of becoming uninhabitable. And this is before movies like Wall-E from Disney that had a similar theme. It was
Hmm.
before Interstellar, which is one of my favorite movies. But the notion of, we screw up our planet so much that we all have to leave. And so, it's basically probably a little too pretty musically given the themes, but because it is a pretty dark, lyrically. But a big part of what we wanted to close it out is that the song ends with, this like people on Transport 37, the last people to escape from Earth, kind of flying away and looking back at this planet that they're not going to be able to return to for a million years. And, it's intended to be hopeful in that the human race is going to carry on, but also kind of, sad and bittersweet in that, well, we're leaving the places our home for, millennia as human beings. So, especially poignant now, given that I'm like literally 3 miles from a fire that burned, Pacific Palisades down to the ground, a lot of it. And these are areas that, I grew up here. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't even know yet the full extent of the damage, but it's just insane, what's kind of happened with these fires. And I didn't want to mention this earlier, but I guess now that I brought up the fires, and we actually just found out that Rich Mouse's studio burned down in the fires. So,
Oh,
yeah, no, our hearts are going out to him because I mean, he just had some irreplaceable equipment, and we have great memories working up there. But a lot of the progressive rock stuff that you'd mentioned, a lot of it was recorded and mixed there, and it's gone. So,
I am really sorry to
um,
hear that. I just
yeah, no, we are too.
and there's it's life is always so precious. Protection of life. That's the first thing when something like this happens. Is everybody okay? And then you go back and you look at what you had and you look at that and you say, it's all, it's not there. It's gone.
Yeah,
And especially when you think about like recordings and it's a history. His life is in that room. You
yeah,
know. Wow.
yeah. So, I guess to wrap up the discussion of planet Earth, I mean, my hope would be that that we all collectively look at things like this and say, you know what, we gotta like not have too many more of these events because I mean,
Yeah.
the more this is just happening way too often, and it's like
Right.
really disruptive to people's lives, and um, it's not going to be an overnight fix, but maybe maybe this and some other events recently make us kind of realize we got to change our priorities and kind of get back on the right track.
I hope so. I hope so for
Yeah,
sure. I want to respect your time today, so I just have a couple more quick questions for you. I'm glad we get to talk through the
sure.
EP like that, though, because it's neat to hear track by track how, and the EP lends itself to that because it's not a 14 track album, to be able to
Yeah,
not, take up your afternoon, and talk about six
yeah,
tracks and really dig into them, I really enjoyed that. And I know other
great.
people will enjoy it too. Um, when you decided to do an EP, what was behind the EP versus a full? You didn't want to wait for more tracks. I mean, some things. Sometimes I wonder. People. I think an EP is a good way to get music out there fast in a world where everybody can listen to so much music on the internet. To stay in the vision of people listening to your music, they start to like some tracks. Like, we gotta get some more out. But by the same token, there's some good space between your records. So I'm just curious your take on an EP, versus an album.
Yeah, I mean, we've had various events that have kind of led to us not being the most prolific band in the world. Without going into those, we did do our album "Surviving Humanity," which we came out in 2021, and between COVID and some other stuff, that album took a few years for us to kind of do. So I think coming out of that, we got into 2022, and we're kind of like, we would love to just do a brand new album, kind of new material, and we actually were working for a while writing and kind of getting together, writing and trying to refine you know material for that. And it was slow going. Like the Deep was one of the things that came out of that, or the original version of the Deep, but it was just really going slowly. And I think that we did that Planet Earth recording to kind of maybe get a little like small win of like, here's one thing we're going to kind of like record and put out quickly. And I think once we did that, we kind of got excited about the idea of doing an EP, and maybe we could put the new writing aside for a little bit, take this old material, kind of get it out there. And the original idea was, in maybe the course of like 4 to 6 months, get something out there. It ended up taking longer than that, but um, so it's a good point. I mean, we're thinking now of like, well, we do want to do like a full album this year, but maybe it would make sense to like, maybe have it be like, a few different EPs that maybe we later combine into a full album. Cause I think that when it is like, say 50 minutes to an hour of music, it can be kind of hard to get everything done. So maybe one lesson from this is like, well, maybe if we did break it up into like, 3 20-minute blocks, we can start to get stuff out there quickly.
And then people who get turned on to this EP, for example, are going to want more, and then you're
Yeah.
back in front of them quicker because there is so much. We can listen to things we would never would have listened to across the world just by hitting the button on
Yeah.
our computer. There's so much,
Yep.
and there's so many guides to what to listen to. There's people who are out there saying, check this out, check this out. And so we're almost on music overload, which I never thought could be possible. I mean, I've got this collection at home that I just have things I've never even opened, and yet
Right.
I'm still on the internet looking up things and listening to things. So it's so the EP is kind of like what Stephen King did with his Green Mill. I think it was, I forget what he did the 3 books. He did them like they were like 3 parts, having something
So
different
the
out
Dark
every
Tower.
Or, yeah, I can't think of what it was called, but he had them in like 3 parts. And it's like, okay, every couple months you got some new writing from Stephen King, and I'm same thing here. Oh, another EP, 4 more tracks. Those last 6 were so amazing, and now this. It's just a way to be in front of because we're in a world where there's just so much. So much.
Yeah, and we've definitely discussed that. So I mean, I guess I still think in terms of like, the album mindset, and I would love to just be able to do a full album, but
right.
Maybe we can figure out a compromise where it is like, 3 EPs that end up like later getting combined into a full album or something.
Yeah. And maybe that's this. It's like someone's like releasing. Maybe that's the compromise. You're releasing parts of an album.
Yeah.
And then you put them together at the end and say, this is how we imagined it, but we wanted to show you the 3 chapters that lead into one big story. Who knows?
Yeah.
Progressive rock.
Yeah, because
I
really want to get, I really want to get additional music out sometime this year. So no, that's a good point you're making.
It's interesting. It's just interesting that how we have to rethink the industry sometimes. Now everything's so different.
Absolutely.
I noticed a lot of your shows have been in California, where you live out there. Do you have any plans with the band to head out east at all, across the country?
Nothing concrete quite yet, but we've absolutely been talking about trying to get out of town and play some other shows, outside of California. LA is a tough market because we played the album release party we did for Stormchaser. We played up in Palmdale, which is in LA County, but it's not part of LA City. And we got a great response up there, and made us kind of realize that like maybe getting a little bit outside of the city limits would maybe lead to some crowds that are a little more kind of receptive to rock and progressive leaning rock. So absolutely talking about it. We just got to try to figure out like maybe we can get some kind of mini tour together later in the year. We'd absolutely be open to doing that.
You bring up a point, and what we're curious to know is how some progressive rock bands have done in some of the bigger cities in the country, like, with data, with SoundScan data or whatever it might be, to see, like, are there pockets of really, bands that come, like, I live in Chicago, and to me, prog rock seems to be a thing here for sure,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a friend who went to see Yes, I just an unbelievable, but like 170 times. 170 times. It's just that's mind blowing to me. And I've seen a band 10 times, and I think that's a lot. But compared to that, I just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And so I mean, and he's one example, but I mean, we have a lot of prog rock in our venue, and I just being in the industry for a while, you see these a lot of these bands get really a good reception, and this is all I know is Chicago. I don't know, so it'd be interesting to see in SoundScan data what cities, what pockets of the country really tend to have prog rock sales or prog rock streaming at this point, just something that's food for thought.
Yeah, I know. And I love Chicago, so I'd, love to play out there. And
you see how I'm kind of pulling you this direction here?
Yeah, no, I'd love it.
But I mean, maybe there's pockets closer to home that are, in other cities that progressive rock is just something that sells for them or is streamed a lot. There's got to be data out there. I mean, I know there is data, but it's changed so much. When I worked for a record label, we would see it each week and we'd analyze it. But the everyday person now, I wouldn't have access to do that anymore, I don't think.
Right.
Although there was some stuff on the internet through iTunes or some BDS scanning brought, somehow that they had some list of the top selling. I don't think it did by city though. So, but it's just interesting to think about those kinds of scenarios, to see how far you have to venture out of California to get that new pocket of progressive rock listeners who are open to, know. So, if there was a band, Rush does not count in this question, but if there was a band that you could tour with, and go on the road, I know you've done some, you did a show with Zebra, Fates Warning. We talked about before. Um, uh, a couple other bands recently. I mean, or in the past that you've been out in the road with, but they're probably like one show, right? In more in California, you get pulled onto a show, I believe. Is that how it with some of the higher profile bands? Not going on the road
Yeah.
with them, but more of like a local. Hey, we need you to open for so and so.
Yeah, I mean it varies. So I think the dream band that we'd love to open for would be Dream Theater.
Oh, okay,
I mean, just because we love them so much, and I almost they're probably like a number two in terms of my favorite progressive rock bands of all time behind Rush. Um, we actually a band that we are actually trying to open a couple of shows for is the band King's X, who
oh,
um, we're very influenced by them. In fact, the song "Far Away" is actually in drop D tuning. It was pretty, especially the earlier version of it, "Velvet What Prism," was very influenced by King's X. And we have a couple other songs on prior albums, like "Line 'Em Up" on our debut, and we have a version with Melissa on our EP, and then the song "Let Go," which is also on our 4-pack EP, both influenced by King's X. So they don't unfortunately they're not really doing like full on tours. They're kind of doing sporadic appearances, but they're doing like 3 shows in Southern California coming up, so we're trying to see if by some miracle we could open up for one or two of them, because that would be just amazing to open for them.
that would be great. I mean, that really would be the
Yeah.
fact that they're coming out to California like that. We've actually, I mean, I don't know if that they were part of a tour, like you said, they're not doing a lot of touring, a lot of one-off shows or whatever, but they actually came to our venue last year, maybe, and
Oh,
then
cool.
maybe a few years before that, maybe before that was like 2017, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're again, I don't know. I mean, they're obviously a big progressive rock band, a big, band, and that's why we see fans at these shows. But we see them at all these shows. There seems to be a good supportive progressive rock base in Chicagoland. People come out
All
to them.
right. Well, I gotta figure out a way to get out there.
Something to think about.
Yep.
um, so, what would be the best way for people to really follow you? I see you guys have a lot of social media. You seem pretty active in doing things. And what would be the best way to find out current information about the band and things like one-off shows or internet videos being put on YouTube or whatnot? What's the best place to start?
Yeah, just go to www.finalgravitytheband.com, and we'll have links to all of our social media sites and YouTube and information about shows and press and all that good stuff. So yeah,
Great.
finalgravitytheband.com.
And if you go to Instagram, I believe it's final dot gravity, right? Because I learned that the other night when I was going to your, instead it wasn't final. I went to final gravity and said I realized it had to be final dot gravity.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
different things like that, those nuances. So you'll find a way to find it, but you got to check out their material online too. The videos, a couple of videos I'd seen, and it's very creative quartet here. You got to check
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Thank you.
Mike, I just have a question for you offline real quick, and we'll wrap things up here. But I just wanted to thank you for your time today, for spending this time with us. And I really, truly enjoy getting to talk track by track. It's my favorite thing to do sometimes. And it just kind of evolved as we talked. I thought, well, there's 6 tracks here. I appreciate you being open to that concept, because it really was neat to break it down track by track. And
Yeah.
I hope that really helps people to want to go back and listen to it and see all the great things you said about it and how it. Oh, I see that. He mentioned this, and he mentioned that one thing that happened in track 3. And so I hope that breaking it down like that is going to help some extra new fans to just want to gravitate towards that. So,
yeah, no, it's fun to go through everything in such detail. So appreciate you having the time to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and you too. Well, I really appreciate your time for that. So, Mike, thanks very much. I'm just going to keep you offline for just a quick second, but thank you. And just, please, people who are going to be watching this interview, just make sure you get out there and check this out, listen to it. I know you're going to fall in love with this music, because it's just really crisp melodies, amazing instrumentation. You're going to listen to instrumentation to an album like you never have before. So
awesome.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.